Rome did not build the greatest empire in history by accident, and they definitely did not do it with armor that instantly rusted in the rain. A Roman soldier kept his iron armor from rusting through some of the wettest, most brutal conditions on Earth. And not for a few years, for decades. And the crazy part is, we have been pulling that armor out of the ground for nearly 2,000 years now. Still intact, still recognizable, still telling a story that nobody really stopped to listen properly until recently. The story of how Roman armor survived so long is honestly one of the strangest overlooked things in the history of ancient technology, because we were so busy assuming Romans were primitive that we never asked the obvious question. So have you ever wondered why people with no modern tools, chemistry and metallurgy textbooks built things that outlasted entire civilizations, while our stuff barely makes it a decade without falling apart? Well, that is exactly what we are going to find out today. Oh, before getting started, don't forget to like and subscribe, but only if you like this video. Let's get into it. The smart use of bronze. Here is something most people never think about. Roman armor was not just iron, they mixed materials, and one of those materials was bronze. And bronze changes everything when we talk about rust. So iron rusts, right? Everyone knows that. But what happens if the rust flakes off and that exposes fresh metal, and then that rusts too? It just keeps going. Bronze does not do that. Bronze forms this green layer, and that layer just sits there and does not go anywhere. Once bronze starts to age, the surface changes. It forms a layer that blocks out moisture and oxygen instead of letting them eat through the metal. A 2025 study in Nature Scientific Reports tested this on real ancient bronze coins and found that the patina worked like a shield. It was not just discoloration, it was protection doing its job, not slowly failing, protecting. Romans put bronze on helmets, fittings, and reinforcement pieces. The parts that soldiers could not realistically maintain every single night on campaign, because iron needs attention. Bronze kind of just handles itself once that green layer forms. And people always think that green color means the metal is rotting. It is the opposite. Researchers looked at bronze artifacts that had been buried for centuries, and a lot of them came out in recognizable shape. According to the researchers, bronze with more tin survived the longest. Roman bronze was made from copper and tin, which means they were already working with a strong mix. The patina on some ancient bronzes was so stable that it kept the original polishing lines visible on the surface. The metal aged, but the finish was still there. The marks from when someone finished that metal thousands of years ago were still there. That is not slow decay. That is basically preservation. Romans figured none of this out in a lab, obviously. They just watched what lasted. Bronze lasted. Roman armor makers were smart about where they put different metals, the parts that really had to last without anyone checking them. That got bronze. Tough and steady. Something that didn't freak out with a little water. The heavy and clunky stuff that had to hold the shape gets the iron, because it was cheap and easier to bang into big pieces. The rest is just bronze again. That mix of half iron and half bronze explains why some of this stuff stuck around way longer than you'd expect even now. Roman iron was not simple iron. People assume Romans just dug up some ore, melted it down and hammered it into shape. And that is kind of true, but also completely misses what was happening. Romans made their iron using bloomery furnaces, and the thing is, the iron that came out of those furnaces was not clean or pure. It had these glassy silicate bits trapped inside it, slag inclusions basically, little pieces of non-metal just stuck in there. Most people would look at that and say, that is a flaw. Bad iron. But that is kind of missing the whole point. Impure metal, low quality, but that is not how it played out. Because of those inclusions, the inside of Roman iron was not uniform. It was a complex, uneven structure. And when corrosion tries to spread through metal, it follows a path. In modern pure iron, that path is wide open. In Roman bloomery iron, the slag stringers kept interrupting it. The corrosion could not just race through the metal the same way. That mattered a lot for how long the armor held up. But it gets more interesting than that. Roman smiths were also doing something called carburization, basically heating iron in contact with carbon-rich material which pushes carbon into the surface of the metal. This hardened the outer layer. And a harder surface does not just resist physical damage, better, it also changes how that surface behaves chemically, which affects how corrosion starts in the first place. There is also evidence of quenching, rapidly cooling hot metal to lock in a harder structure. A 2005 study published in the Journal of Archaeological Science looked at Roman ferrous armor pieces found in northern Britain, dating from around 100 to 300 AD. And what they found was genuinely surprising. Different pieces of the same armor were made using completely different treatments. Some components were quenched, some were deliberately softened to stay flexible. 5 specimens showed clear signs of warm or cold working to harden them. And here is the thing about the armor pieces. They were not all made the same way. Some parts were quenched, some were softened on purpose. Different treatments for different pieces of the same armor. Scientists and researchers went through 7 types of Roman ferrous armor, and what they kept running into was just how varied and deliberate everything was. These were not guys randomly hammering metal. They clearly had some understanding of what different treatments did to the iron, even if they could not explain why. Romans understood, at least through experience, that different structures in iron produced different results in the field. They did not have the scientific language for it, but they had the knowledge, and that knowledge is a big part of why Roman iron armor behaved differently than you would expect cheap ancient metal to behave. Oil and fat, the real rust shield. Nobody really talks about this part, but it might actually be the most practical thing Romans did for their armor. They rubbed it down with fat. Animal fat mostly. Sometimes lanolin, which is a waxy stuff that comes naturally from sheep's wool. And yeah, that sounds kind of gross, but it worked really well. The whole idea is pretty simple, honestly. Iron rusts when moisture and oxygen get to it. So if you coat the surface with something greasy that moisture just cannot get through anymore, the fat sits on the metal and acts like a seal. No contact, no rust. Romans did not need a chemistry degree to figure that out. They just noticed that oiled metal lasted longer than metal that was left alone. What is interesting is modern science went back and tested this. According to scientific studies, lanolin coatings reduced corrosion on mild steel, even in acidic and salty environments. And when you mixed lanolin with linseed oil, the protection got even better. So, the stuff Romans were using on their armor was not some folk remedy. It genuinely worked, and we have the data to prove it now. But here is the catch. You must keep doing it. The coating wears off. It gets scraped away. It dries out. So, if you oil your armor once and forget about it for 6 months, you are basically back to square one. The Society for Historical Archaeology makes this same point about iron conservation. A moisture barrier that is not maintained will fail. That was just as true 2,000 years ago. And this is where the Roman military structure helped a lot. Soldiers were responsible for their own equipment. Their centurions checked on it. There was real accountability. You showed up with rusty gear, and that was a problem. Not just for you, but for the unit. The armor also cost serious money to make. Iron and skilled labor were not cheap, so there was this economic pressure on top of the military pressure to just take care of your stuff. Archaeologists found armor that had been carefully stored and repaired and used over long periods. That does not happen by accident. That is what consistent maintenance looks like in the archaeological record. So yes, the oil and fat things sound almost too simple, but that simplicity is kind of the whole point. It was easy enough that soldiers could do it regularly, and regular is the only thing that matters when it comes to keeping iron from rusting. Storage and climate helped more than we think. Here is something that almost never comes up when people talk about Roman armor lasting a long time, where they kept it, and what the air was like around it. Rust is not just about the metal, it is about the environment the metal sits in, and this is well studied. Research published in Studies in Conservation found that iron corrosion basically stops below around 20% relative humidity, and above 60% it accelerates pretty dramatically. That gap is massive. The difference between dry storage and damp storage is not a little bit of extra rust. It is the difference between armor that lasts decades and armor that falls apart in years. Rome had a geographic advantage here that people just do not think about. And that is not a small difference. Northern Britain is just wet, like constantly, and the Mediterranean is not. That is really the whole point. A soldier storing his armor somewhere dry and warm is dealing with a completely different situation than someone stored this armor near Hadrian's Wall, where the air is damp pretty much every single day, and you can see this in what gets dug up. The condition of armor varies a lot depending on where it was found. But Romans also did not just leave their armor lying around. They had dedicated storage rooms called armamentaria. These were actual purpose-built armories inside Roman forts, not damp cellars, not piles in a corner somewhere, proper rooms designed with ventilation in mind. Roman military architecture generally used raised floors and well-ventilated wall designs to keep moisture down. That was not an accident. Damp buildings rotted wood and rusted iron, and Romans had been dealing with both problems long enough to build around them. The Canadian Conservation Institute has this line in their metal storage guidelines that kind of sums it all up. Stored improperly, metals corrode. That is it. Romans did not read that guideline, obviously, but after centuries of watching equipment fail or survive, they landed on basically the same conclusion just through experience. And then there is the regular use and inspection side of things. And armor that gets regularly pulled out, handled, oiled, and looked over just does not get the chance to rust badly. It never sits long enough in one spot. The Roman military was obsessive about readiness, and that obsessiveness had this side effect of keeping iron in decent condition almost by accident. That continuous attention was its own form of environmental protection. The hidden role of leather. While storage and climate did a lot of work, there was another factor keeping Roman armor from rusting that almost nobody talks about. It is always the metal that gets all the attention. But the leather was doing something really important, and it had nothing to do with looks or comfort. Roman armor had leather basically everywhere. Straps holding plates together, padding underneath, hinges connecting moving parts. Historic England found that most of the organic material recovered alongside Roman armor pieces from Carlisle was leather. Not a little bit of it, most of it. So why does that matter for rust? Well, here is the thing. When two metal surfaces are pressed directly against each other, tiny gaps form between them, and those gaps trap moisture. And trapped moisture is just about the worst possible situation for iron. The corrosion that happens in those little gaps is called crevice corrosion, and it moves faster than surface rust does because the moisture just sits there with nowhere to go. Leather between the plates meant the metal was not touching metal. The gap problem mostly went away. Moisture could not get trapped in the same way, and that is not something Romans sat down and engineered deliberately. It just came out of using leather for practical reasons, and it happened to solve a corrosion problem at the same time. University of Michigan conservators working on actual Roman leather armor pieces used soft brushes and low suction vacuums to clean it. Really careful stuff. And the reason they were that careful is because the leather was not just some accessory strapped onto the real armor. It was holding the whole preservation story together, basically. Take the leather away and suddenly the metal plates are sitting against each other, and you have got a rust problem that no amount of oiling fixes easily. So, when researchers actually started putting Roman armor under microscopes and running proper analysis on it, things got pretty interesting pretty fast. So researchers looked at archaeological iron and what happens to it over centuries, not just a few years. And one of the more surprising things they found is that the rust itself is kind of like a record. The corrosion layers that form over hundreds of years hold information about the conditions the metal was sitting in the whole time, which is wild when you think about it. And then there is the chloride problem, which is something most people have never heard of, but it matters a lot. Iron artifacts sitting in the ground for hundreds of years absorb chloride salts from the soil around them. While they are buried, that is mostly fine. But the moment you dig them up and expose them to air and moisture, those chlorides activate. And then the corrosion just takes off really fast. Some Roman armor that survived underground for almost 2,000 years started deteriorating within years of being excavated just because of this. The Society for Historical Archaeology developed specific treatment protocols around this. Getting the chlorides out of excavated iron is one of the first things conservators have to deal with, and why some pieces survived way better than others is honestly not a simple answer. It is a bunch of things at once: the quality of the iron, whether someone maintained it, what the soil chemistry was like where it ended up buried, and then what happened after it got dug up, which people never think about but is just as important as everything else. A well-made piece of armor buried in dry alkaline soil and then properly conserved after excavation can come out looking almost recognizable. The same quality armor buried in wet acidic ground with high chloride content is basically unrecognizable corrosion by the time anyone finds it. There is also what the metallographic studies from northern Britain confirmed. 7 different types of Roman ferrous armor from around 100 to 300 AD showed evidence of carburization quenching and cold working, all in different components of the same armor. The carburized surfaces are kind of fascinating from a rust perspective because pushing carbon into the surface of iron changes how that surface behaves chemically. Corrosion just has a harder time getting started on it. Romans had no idea why, they just knew it worked. Romans did not know why that was true, but they kept doing it because the results spoke for themselves. So here is what it all comes down to really. Roman armor did not rust slowly because of some magical secret or lost technology. It was just a bunch of practical things done consistently. Bronze where it made sense. Bloomery iron with all its weird slag inclusions doing unexpected things. Fat and oil rubbed on regularly. Leather keeps metal from sitting against metal. Dry storage in ventilated buildings. And soldiers who actually had to answer for the condition of their gear. None of it was one big discovery. Just generations of people watching what worked and doing more of that. And the metallographic studies hammer this home. Researchers found evidence of carburization, quenching, and cold working all applied to different parts of the same armor. These were not random choices. Someone understood that different parts needed different properties even without being able to explain the science behind it. And yet for some reason we kept treating Romans like they were just guessing, like they stumbled into decent armor by accident. But then you look at what is sitting in museums and buried in the ground across Europe, and that whole assumption just falls apart. And the funny part is, modern conservation science basically keeps arriving at the same conclusions Romans had already figured out. It just took us a couple thousand years to catch up. Dry storage, protective coatings, regular maintenance, just with better explanations now. Now just pause for a moment and think, how much knowledge did we lose simply because we stopped paying attention? Well, that's all for today. Thank you for watching. We'll be back soon.